The Chudov Monastery was one of the oldest monasteries in Moscow. Founded in the 14th century, it was located to the northeast from the white stone cathedrals that were built under the great prince Ivan Kalita. The emergence of the Chudov Monastery connected with the legend of Taiduwa, a Tatar Khan's wife who was miraculously healed from a disease. The legend is recorded in the chronicles of the 15th century and in the life of Alexis, a Saint Metropolitan Bishop of Moscow, compiled by Pachomny Sierp. In 1357, Metropolitan Alexis, who was well known by his powerful prayers, was summoned to the Golden Horde for the healing of blind Taiduwa. Before his departure, the saint held a service in the Uspensky Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin. During the prayer, the candle in front of the coffin of Metropolitan Peter was miraculously lit. Alexis broke the candle in pieces and gave to the people for a blessing. According to the legend, when Taiduwa regained her sight, she gave Metropolitan Alexis a territory of Horde Court in Moscow, where he founded the monastery. In 1358, a wooden church was built and consecrated in honor of the miracle of the Archangel Michael in Colossae, and thus the monastery started to be called Chudov of Miracles. In 1365, there was built the first stone cathedral. Founder of the monastery, Metropolitan Alexis, was buried in the Chudov Voznesenskiy side chapel of the Chudov Monastery Cathedral. Metropolitan Alexis, the secular name Eleuterus, was born in the 1290s. His father, Fyodor Byakont, was a Boyar from the city of Chernigov. He served to the first Moscow prince Daniel Alexandrovich. In his early years, Eleuterus retired to a cloister in Moscow, Chudov Voznesenskiy Monastery, where in 1320 he was tonsured and received a religious name, Alexis. In 1355 or 1363, the Patriarch of Constantinople, Philaphiem, became the Metropolitan of Kiev and Russia. Metropolitan Alexis started tutoring the son of the Moscow prince, Ivan Ivanovich Krasny. The boy soon would become the Prince Dmitry Donskoy. The Museum of Architecture preserved a tombstone of Fyodor Byakont, which was set in Epiphany Monastery in 1805 by his descendant, F.M. Plisheum. The tombstone is located in the Donskoy Monastery. In 1431, the cathedral walls collapsed and the structure was rebuilt. As it is said in the life of Metropolitan Alexis, the new church was smaller than the previous one, but higher and more spacious and splendid, and had 3 domes and stairs that led upright, and that new church was enriched with various amenities. The cathedral suffered from a devastating fire and was built anew by Italian craftsmen in 1501 to 1505. The Italians also participated in the construction of the Grand Kremlin Palace under Ivan III. The cathedral was a harmonious building with zakomaras, an arch-like semicircular top of the wall, put on a high basement. Just like Uspensky Cathedral of an architect Aristotle Fioravanti, the Chudov Cathedral was originally crowned with 5 domes. Northern, western and southern facades were decorated with a column-type frieze. Beneath, there was made a Renaissance decorative belt of terracotta. Floral motifs and dolphins are notable in the cathedral decorations, which resemble a Renaissance ceramic frieze of Troitskaya Church in Chashnikova. The bases of the domes were embellished with the very same ceramic belt. Also, their surfaces were decorated with a columned frieze. Northern and western portals were made out of white stone, according to the tradition of Moscow architecture. However, Italian carvers added to portals Renaissance-inspired decorations. The southern portal had a Renaissance look and was created from ceramic details. An old wooden refectory originally was located to the south from the cathedral. In 1483 to 1485, it was rebuilt in stone at a new place. An old Alexievskaya refectory, according to historic documents, had upper and lower chambers, cells and cellars. In 1680, with the contribution of the Tsar Fyodor Alexievich, the church was re-erected according to the drawing which the Tsar sent to constructors himself. The church was a many-domed facility, elated at the basement. A spacious refectory adjoined the main structure from the west. Under one roof, with 10 domes, there were 2 temples, a temple of Błogosławienia and the temple of Saint Alexis. Inside the building, in the arch, arranged in the wall, which united 2 temple spaces, there was installed a reliquary of the founder of the monastery, transferred there from the cathedral. In the refectory, there were also several side chapels. The decor of the facade looked pretty modest for this time, apparently because the cathedral belonged to a monastery. The south facade of the Alexis Temple faced Ivanovskaya Square and played the dominant role as a key architectural element of the Kremlin. Along the perimeter, the entire Chudov monastery land was surrounded with cells and outbuildings. At the Chudov street, there were gates, in ancient times adjoined to the church of St. Ioan Lestvichnik, built in 1556, and depicted at the ancient plans of the Kremlin. In the second half of the 18th century, the church was replaced by the Temple of Plato and Roman, with a bell tower above the gates. It became another vertical dominant of the monastery. The appearance of the Ivanovo Square, the main element of which was a group of Kremlin belfries, and Ivan, the Great Bell Tower, was finally formed in the 1770s to 1780s, thanks to the construction works associated with the Chudov monastery. The architectural ensemble to the southeast, from Alexievskaya refectory, which was attached to the Miracle Monastery in 1677, became the residence of the head of the Moscow diocese in 1744. In 1775, the Moscow Archbishop Plato began to build the Metropolitan Palace to replace the buildings that had been damaged during the Plague Revolt of 1771. The structure had forms of high classicism. The author of the project was the architect, Matvey Fyodorovich Kazakov, which also made a lot of projects for the Kremlin during this time. The corner of the building was formed by a semi-rotunda with 4 Tuscan columns, which effectively stand out against the flat decorations of the facades. The rotunda was crowned with a belvedere decorated with monogram initials of Archbishop Plato. In 1817, the building passed under control of the court administration. In 1824, the 3rd floor was built over. In 1780, the south facade of the Alexis Church, which faced Ivanovskaya Square, was amplified with a main porch after the plans of Matvey Fyodorovich Kazakov at the initiative of Metropolitan Plato. The architectural appearance of the porch was accomplished in Gothic tradition, which made it discord with the late medieval architecture of the church. However, that pseudo-Gothic shapes of Kazakov's porch became a symbol of the Chudov monastery. Chudov monastery was especially esteemed the most revered cloister, which was related to many important events in the Russian history. The architectural ensemble, which included masterpieces of Russian architecture of different eras and styles, was demolished in 1929 on the order of the Soviet authorities. The Voznesenskiy female monastery of the Moscow Kremlin was located east of the Chudov monastery. Its territory adjoined the east perimeter of the Kremlin walls. The Voznesenskiy monastery was founded in 1407 by Grand Duchess Yevdokia, the widow of the Moscow prince Dmitry Donskoy. In the monastery, she became a nun under the name of Euphresnia, planning to spend there the rest of her years. On nun Euphresnia's contribution, there was laid the first stone monastery cathedral, which had been built intermittently for 6 decades. briefly outlived her husband, Euphresnia was buried in the unfinished cathedral. Since that time, the Kremlin's cathedral of the Voznesenskiy monastery became the burial chamber of Grand Duchesses and Queens of Moscow. Construction of the Ascension Cathedral was continued by the Euphresnia's daughter-in-law, Grand Duchess Sofia Vitovna, the wife of the Grand Prince Vasily I. Chronicle report that the temple was built up to the porch, where there's the top. The construction of this facility was constantly interrupted by numerous devastating fires in Moscow, the attacks of the Horde forces, the civil war, and the war with Lithuania. For decades, the temple remained unfinished. The building was falling into disrepair. Only in 1467, by the order of Grand Duchess Maria Yaroslavovna, the widow of Euphresnia's grandson, Prince Basil II the Dark, the vaults of the temple were overhauled and the surface of scorched facades were retiled. A year later, in 1468, the first stone cathedral was consecrated in honor of the Ascension, Voznesenskiy in Russian. In the monastery, there was a revered relic, the old Smolensk icon of the Mother of God, Udigitria, which was made in Greece and stored in the cathedral. During a devastating fire of 1482, the relic was damaged. An outstanding painter, Dionysius, made a new sacred image on the ancient board. This work has come down to our time and is stored in the collection of the Tretyakov Gallery. In 1518, Grand Prince Vasily III, due to disrepair, built a new stone cathedral of the Voznesenskiy monastery. The temple was severely damaged by several fires in Moscow, so, in the late 80s of the 16th century, on the contribution of Queen Irina Godunova, the wife of the Emperor Theodore Ivanovich, the cathedral was built anew. Voznesenskiy Cathedral is a high temple crowned with 5 domes. Its walls are finished with zakamars, the arch-like semicircular tops. The design of the facade decoration resembled the Arkhangelsky Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin, which was a typical feature of Russian architecture of that period. The walls of the Cathedral of the Ascension were dismembered by double-deck pilasters. The bottoms of the facades were additionally embellished with an arcade. The upper part of the temple and pilasters were decorated with panels. The plan of Moscow in 1597, under the name Kremlinograd, which probably was made by Boris Godunov's son Fyodor, shows round windows that are located above the altar of the Voznesenskiy Cathedral. In ancient times, to the south of the cathedral, there was located a Church of St. George, founded in 1527. Its facade faced the street that led from the Spassky Gate to Ivan the Great Bell Tower and Cathedral Square. Along the street there was a stone wall with 2 built-in towers. In the southwest corner of the monastery grounds there was a one-domed church built in 1515. The vaults of the church carry a belfry. The building was consecrated in the name of Alexandria Patriarchs Afanasy and Kirill. To the west from the church, the courtyard of the Novodevichi convent was located. The territory of the Voznesenskiy monastery was surrounded by cells and outbuildings at the east, north and west. To the north of the Voznesenskiy cathedral there was an elongated cell building. The street between the Voznesenskiy and the Chudov monastery stayed untouched for a long time and was built over later. During the time of troubles, Voznesenskiy monastery participated in the important historical events. Here, in 1605, a daughter of Boris Godunov, Xenia, was captivated for a while. Later, she took the veil under the name of Olga. In the same year, Dmitri lodged in the Voznesenskiy monastery the mother of the deceased Prince Dmitri, Maria Nagaya, who became a nun, Martha. In 1606, Marina Mniszuk lived at the Voznesenskiy monastery till the moment she got married. After the accession of the Romanov dynasty, the nun, Martha, secular name Ksenia Ivanovna Romanova, the mother of the Emperor Mikhail Fyodorovich, inhabited the Voznesenskiy monastery. In 1617, in the monastery was built a wooden church in honor of Mikhail Malane, who was the saint patron of Mikhail Fyodorovich. In 1626, there was erected a wooden church of the martyr Theodor Pergansky, the saint patron of Patriarch Filariut, Mikhai's father. After the death of the Patriarch in 1634, in the southeast corner of the Voznesenskiy monastery, a two-story stone church in the name of Michael Malain was a chapel of Fyodor Piergamon was built. The temple volume once was completed with kokoshniks, a keel-like decorative element. Above there was a dome on a slender basement. The chapel was located to the north of the Mikhail Malain's church. The northern facade of the chapel was easy to see from the cloister yards. Altars of St. Michael's Church adjoined the Kremlin wall to the north of the Spassky Tower. So, in the lower level of the church, there was made a passage to the household zone of the monastery, which was located along the walls of the Kremlin. Byzhen Ogurtsov and Simeka Bilay were the creators of the church. The temple was originally designed in the style of the first half of the 17th century. Photographs of the beginning of the 20th century reveals the window of the simple rectangular frames with shallow profiling at the first tier. Probably during the construction of the belfry, completed in 1694, the facades were partially altered, so the nature of the design was changed. Since then, some elements typical for the Narushkin Baroque appeared. At the photographs of the beginning of the 20th century, we can see stile strips with fractured pediments of windows at the second tier of the Mikhail Milena church. The last phase of the reconstruction of the Voznesenskiy monastery belongs to the first half of the 19th century. In 1686, to the south of the Mikhail Malain church, there was erected a Catherine church. It replaced the church of Afanasy and Kirill of Alexandria, created in 1517, and enlarged in size with the adjoining of the refectory. Long before the War of 1812, there was decided to rebuild the old Catherine's Church with the purpose to increase it in size and thereby to stress the importance of this temple for the Voznesenskiy monastery. Initially, Metropolitan Platon approved the project of the architect Alexei Nikitich Bakarev. However, at the request of the Emperor Alexander I, the architect Karl Ivanovich Rossi was chosen as the author of the project. The temple, built in the 1808 to 1817 years, was an unusual spiritual building with elements of classicism. Also in the decoration, there were used Gothic motifs. Rectangular volume of the Catherine's Church was finished with triangular pediments, which were interspersed with tall pyramidal details. They hid the foundation of the dome. Gothic techniques of decoration of the windows, portals, as well as white decorative motifs on the bright walls of the church created an unusual festive mood. Voznesenskiy Monastery of the Moscow Kremlin was a place of historical and human dramas and the repository of spiritual relics. It was demolished in 1929, simultaneously with the Chudov male monastery, due to the fact that employees of the Moscow Kremlin were able to convince the authorities to preserve the burial of the greatest princesses and queens. On the eve of the demolition of the Voznesenskiy Cathedral, all the sarcophagi with the remains were transferred to the ancient chamber, located at the southwest corner of Arkhangelskiy Cathedral.